Welcome to the PO3 video tonight. I'm Chad Graham, your Next Steps pastor here at High Point Church. I am so excited to be going through books of the Bible with the church, and I just have to say I'm so encouraged by the faithfulness of the congregation, reading through the Bible, taking the Bible seriously. And tonight we're going to talk about 1 Samuel 16 through 18, and I'm going to give some context to the book of 1 and 2 Samuel actually. And you guys will dive into those chapters in your group. But I want to kind of set the tone and the overview for 1 and 2 Samuel. You won't touch 2 Samuel tonight, but 1 and 2 Samuel is actually one book. It was actually written as one collective work. The reason that there's a 1 and a 2 Samuel is because of scroll length. So they just couldn't fit, when it was being written, they couldn't fit it all on one scroll. So that's why there are two scrolls, 1 and 2 Samuel. But it's meant to be one sweeping narrative showcasing how God interacts with Israel at a very pivotal moment when they're taking on their first king. To give a little backstory to 1 and 2 Samuel, we're picking up right where Judges left off. And if you ever read the book of Judges, hopefully you have, it's very gory. It's very violent. It's one of the most violent books in the Old Testament. And we see the people of God are very, very far from God. The judges have become corrupt. There's a lack of morality and moral backbone in Israel's society. Idolatry has run rampant. And so they're in desperate need of a renewal, of a coming back to Yahweh. And so 1 and 2 Samuel is the story of Israel coming back to Yahweh through the prophet Samuel and the King Saul and King David. And so the book really focuses on three main characters, Samuel, Saul, and David, and it shows how Israel moves from being very far from God to being back in God's presence, back worshiping in God's presence with the Ark of the Covenant, and they go through a trial period with having a king. And so first we have Samuel. Samuel begins, his narrative begins in 1 Samuel, and we see that Samuel is given over to the priesthood as a boy. And he's given over to the temple at a very young age, and he's trained up in the ways of the priesthood, and he's actually this beacon of light in this very corrupt system. In fact, the head priest and his two sons are very wicked, and they end up falling out and being cursed by God. And we see this innocence in Samuel and this desire to seek after Yahweh. And God's presence is so far from Israel that the Ark of the Covenant literally lies dormant in the temple. Samuel's able to sleep right next to the Ark. He doesn't even realize that this is the Ark that used to hold the very presence of God. And so it's just that symbol of how far God is from the people. And as Samuel gets older and becomes a judge and becomes a prophet to the people, he constantly tries to get the people to see that they don't need a king. They have Yahweh. They have a perfect ruler in Yahweh. But just like Israel is always doing in the Old Testament, they want to do what their neighbors are doing. And so they petition God. They petition God. They don't want to disobey God, so they keep asking God for a king. And he finally says yes. But it comes with a very stern warning. We should ask at this point, why doesn't God want Israel to have a king? Well, God tells them why they shouldn't want a king. A king takes and takes and takes from the people. The only way a king has power, the only way a king can create a kingdom is by taking from the people. He's going to tax the people. He's going to take their firstborn daughters into a harem. He's going to take their firstborn sons into an army. He's going to have to take a portion of their livestock to make it his own livestock. He's going to have to take a greater portion of the land to house all of the people and the servants and the temple and all of these different things that will be built for a king. And Yahweh's trying to give them wisdom. He's trying to tell Israel, look, the only king you need is me. On top of all the things that a human king will take, I can give you those things because I'm Yahweh and I have the power to do this. But on top of all of that, you're also going to have to deal with corruption. You're also going to have to deal with kings that go far from the Lord, that go far from the law, that stray. And you don't want to deal with this. And he pleads with Israel. And over about the span of 6 or 7 years, we see Samuel trying to teach the people, but finally God relents and gives them a king. And that's where we get the second character in 1 Samuel, which is King Saul. King Saul and King David are meant to be contrasted in the story. King Saul is the first king of Israel. King David follows after many years of turmoil with King Saul. But King Saul is exactly what God warned the people that they didn't want. In fact, when King Saul was supposed to be inaugurated as king, they couldn't find him because he was so cowardly, he was hiding. And they asked, "Where is Saul? Where is the king?" And he didn't want the role, but he took it anyway. And Saul just didn't have the character over time to rule the people. Eventually, having power, having money, having wealth, having women, having all sorts of pleasures that come with being king, it corrupted Saul, and he went far from God, and he ended up taking counsel outside of God's counsel. And so we see all of the warnings that God gave to the people of Israel come to fruition in Saul. Now, luckily, we have a gracious God. We have a God who is a God who redeems even broken things like kingship. And so we see the third character in 1 Samuel, King David. King David comes onto the scene as a shepherd boy, full of confidence, not arrogance, a complete reliance on God. And he sees how King Saul and even grown generals and warriors, how they're so afraid of Goliath. And he hears Goliath, this giant, taunting the God of Israel, taunting Yahweh. And as a shepherd boy, just with a little sling, he goes to the river and he finds 5 stones and he says, "I won't need 5. And he has the confidence and he walks up and he slays Goliath. He literally takes down Goliath, and he showcases all the moral courage and virtue that you want to see in a king because he's God's man and he's seeking after God's own heart. And so we start to see the beginning of King David. We won't go into David's whole story because that's actually better encapsulated in 2 Samuel. But we see the rise of this new redemptive king who will eventually have a lineage in Christ, in Jesus. And so 1 Samuel is one of these amazing books of the Bible that really showcase the history of Israel, what's happening in Israel, and how God is truly the only ruler of his people. If there's anything to take away from 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, it's that God is the only one capable of ruling Israel, not a human king. And what we see in 1 and 2 Samuel is a foreshadowing of a perfect king to come, King Jesus. And so I encourage you guys to delve deep. This 1 and 2 Samuel is full of amazing stories of faithfulness, of turmoil, of redemption. And so I encourage you to dive deep and get into the Power of 3 reading. I'm Chad Graham, your Next Steps pastor here at High Point Church. Enjoy your study.